Welcome to the Mac and Fish podcast. Today, our first segment, we will have Manny Navarro of The Athletic on. He will discuss the University of Miami football program. After Manny, Corey Long and Charles, aka Fish Fishbein, will break down the national championship game between Ohio State and Alabama. The Tide roll again and look to be back in 2021. We're back with another episode of the Mac and Fish podcast. Our host this week, McKinley Roll, is out with load maintenance. He's the Kawhi Leonard of the Mac and Fish podcast. Not sure if he has a hammy got tight or something, but filling in for Mac this week will be co-host Corey Long. What's up, Corey?
What's up? Yeah, he said he had to work, and I'm like, teachers are off Monday. So whatever he's got to do is something shady. No McKinley.
All right, man. But for those that you don't know who Corey is, he's worked at ESPN, wrote for the AP, now writes for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and most importantly, he works for WalterFootball.com. We had to get that in there. He's on his 35th mock draft, by the way. So you guys that like mock drafts, he has a new one every 5 minutes.
Yeah, they got a new mock draft. I don't even. I'm so lost right now. I'm just trying to figure out who my Jets are going to pick. It's somewhere between, Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and the offensive tackle from Oregon and one of the wide receivers from Alabama. And I'm ready to give up.
Well, I'm a Wilson fan, so that's the route I'd go. But
that's the route I'd go too.
So we're going to have our first segment this weekend, and we have a special guest, Manny Navarro of the Atlantic. Manny covers University of Miami and pretty much every other sport team in Miami. Manny's one of the true insiders of University of Miami football. What's up, Manny?
What's up, Charles? And I got to correct you on where I work. You said the Atlantic. It's the Athletic, but it's all good.
The Athletic, man. I knew I got something wrong,
It's all good, brother. Appreciate you bringing me on and being a part of the podcast. You've been telling me about this for a while, and now I get to be on with you and Corey. I feel like we should be doing this somewhere at the state championships in Orlando, like at Fridays or something.
Oh, we definitely listen, but that would have to be an unedited version, and there's going to be a side of me that a lot of people have never seen. The one where I haven't taken the medication before the podcast.
Right. Yeah, I think the unedited version, it certainly, look, you're entertaining whether you're clean or not, but certainly the dirtier version of Charles Fishbein is usually makes me go to the bathroom and pee because I can't hold it in. I laugh so much.
Oh, man, that's all good, man. We'll keep this one clean so you don't get fired this week. But we'll get right into it. Hey, Manny, the big news this week, Manny hired one of the top recruiters and defensive back coaches in the country in T-Rob, and for those that don't know who T-Rob is, that's Tavares Robinson. He played his high school football locally at Coral Park, played at Auburn. I believe Eddie Grant actually recruited him back in the day. The cornerback position and coaching, Mike Rump's been a sore spot with the Miami fans. What do you think T-Rob brings to the table that maybe some of the past coaches haven't brought?
Well, I think, first of all, he's a former defensive coordinator. He's been that for the last 5 years. So I think that's really helped him grow as a coach to get a sort of a different perspective of the entire defense and how everything works hand in hand. I think sometimes position coaches can be so sort of just into whatever it is that they're doing, whether it be recruiting or coaching their DBs, that, you start to appreciate a little bit more how everything's sort of put together. So I think that's really, really good. The fact that he's had some DC experience. I know Manny wanted that on the offensive side of the ball, and he's got that with two of his coaches and Garen Justice and Rob Likens, two guys that were former offensive coordinators. So, but as far as what he brings, I mean, this is just a guy who's so well connected to the community in South Florida. Like, I talked with Daryl Heidelberg, who was the coach at Miami Norland, and of course he produced Eric Flowers and Duke Johnson. Those two guys played for him over there. He talked about how often T-Rob would just come around, and it wasn't, even if he didn't have guys that were being recruited, if there were down years at Norland where he didn't have top guys, T-Rob still would come by just to sort of build relationships. And, that's kind of what Miami needs. And, Mike Rumpf, as good of a position coach as he is, he's a guy who played in the NFL, was a first round pick. And, I think in his sort of role, he could recruit guys, but I don't think he was as into it as maybe T-Rob was, in terms of being a guy who just had the hunger for it, that wanted to pass by high schools and visit, just to, visit and talk to guys, even if he wasn't there. And I think in Miami-Dade and Broward County in particular, those coaches remember that. They know who stops by their school, and they have an influence on their kids' decisions. And I think in a lot of ways, getting T-Rob is about just upgrading the recruiting department for Miami. And in addition to that move, Manny D has also hired DeMarcus Van Dyke to his staff, which I think was another move specifically related to recruiting. So to me, hiring T-Rob is about upgrading the recruiting, and then also bringing in somebody who at least has the experience of calling the defense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously T-Rob, tremendous coach. Really one of unmatched as a recruiter in a lot of ways. And he came in right away, I guess, swinging for the fences. He was able to get one of the top players out of the portal. I mean, one of the top rated players in Miami and down in high school in Florida over the last few years, Tyreek Stevenson, went to Georgia, jumped in the portal, decided he's going to play at Miami. Tyreek kind of had an up and down year at Georgia, but he definitely showed up in the bowl game. What do you think with him coming in? Where do you think he fits in Miami secondary?
Well, I think right away, he's probably the best cornerback on the roster. I think Al Blades, DJ Ivy are two guys that have kind of been up and down in their career. They've had some moments where they've played well and come up with big plays, but I think Miami's really looking for a true number one guy can put at that position. And I know Tyreek kind of played a bunch of slot corner, nickel corner for Georgia, and in the box some. But I think part of the reason he's coming to Miami is they're going to give him the opportunity to be the number one corner on this team. Corey Couch is a guy who really, really emerged this season, a kid that I know Charles liked for a long time out of Hollywood Chaminade. And by the end of the season, he was kind of the number one corner. But I think getting a guy like Tyreek, now you've got a legit number one guy who has the talent to be a number one guy, and some other guys who can be more complementary type pieces. So, to me, Tyreek is just, he's a guy that they wanted really badly in 2019. He didn't come. And I think, the coaching staff never stopped having a relationship with him, especially the guys in the recruiting department. Coach Cooney, who heads up the recruiting department for Miami, DeMarcus Van Dyke, who just got promoted to staff. And I think it was just one of those deals where, once the kid was sort of disappointed at Georgia that he wasn't getting the opportunities that he wanted, specifically on the outside at corner, he started looking for a place that would give him that opportunity. And I think Georgia, kind of regrets maybe the way that they handled it. He was supposed to be a number one corner for them this coming season, and now he's gonna do it for Miami.
News comes in threes. Miami got more good news with underclassmen that decided to come back. This is something that's kind of hurt Miami in the past, and why they haven't been able to carry that momentum from season to season. It's not, listen, they're always going to have their top end kids, and those guys leave, the Rousseaus, but they got good news with Mike Harley, Jared Williams, McLeod. How big is this for Miami in 2021 season that some of these upperclassmen decided to stay another year?
Yeah, Charles, I think it's big. I think it shows you that Manny's actually having an influence. Him and his coaching staff are having an influence on talking to these guys. I think, you look at some examples from last year, Jeff Thomas, who was their number one receiver, and Trajan Bandy, who was their number one cornerback. Even though they were told by the NCAA, I mean, not by the NCAA, but by the NFL draft committee that, hey, you're probably not going to go very high, they still made the jump. And both of those guys went undrafted, and I think only one of them is still on a practice squad in the league. So, Miami's had a lot of kids over the years that have made mistakes. Those were just sort of the two last examples. And I think, he really convinced Mike Harley that, look, you put up some great numbers the second half of this season, but if you come back and you are a true number one wide receiver, you might be able to get yourself into the second or third round versus being a guy who's drafted at the end of the draft. So, I think that was great. I think Jared Williams is a guy who played half the season with an injured hand. Couldn't really perform at an elite level, didn't grade out well. But he started and he was consistent for them, and he gave them something that they needed. And I think he's another guy who looked at it and said, you know what? I kind of like college. I'm gonna come back for a seventh year, which is nuts. But he wanted to come back. And then a guy like Zach McLeod, really, he played poorly this past season. Linebacker position was bad. And in the bowl game, he gets switched to defensive end. And now all of a sudden, a position where you lose a Jalen Phillips, you lose a Quincy Roche, Now you've got a sixth-year senior at least in that room with some of those other young defensive ends like Jafari Harvey, and now DeAndre Johnson, who's another one of their transfers, a kid out of Tennessee. You got some older guys in that room to provide a little bit of leadership. So I think all around, Manny's done a good job addressing needs through the transfer portal and convincing guys to come back and make this team better. That's something that, like you said, Charles, for years, it always feels like, Miami gets a couple really good players and then they go pro because they want the money contract, I spoke to John Beeson about that at the last ACC meetings, the one in 2019. And, he talked about talking Shaq Quarterman to coming back, and then Shaq came back and, he ended up, I think, being a fourth round pick. So, for some of these guys coming back and playing that extra year does help them a lot.
Yeah, and speaking of coming back, De'Aaron King had decided before the Cheez-It Bowl that he was going to come back one more year. I was at the Cheez-It Bowl covering it for the AP. We saw what happened. He tore his ACL in a non-contact play when he was trying to make a cut. Can you give us an update of where he is with his rehab? I mean, what are his playing prospects look like next year? I'm assuming he'll miss the spring, but given the recovery time, he should be ready for fall camp or at least summer camp, right?
Yeah, I think he's been telling a few people close to him that the end of July is when he expects to be ready to go to practice. So he's already had the surgery. He's already going through rehab. And, Derek's just one of those guys that's self-motivated. He's going to do everything he has to do to get himself back on the field. And so to me, I think he'll be ready to go in the opener against Alabama. Will it be a little bit of an adjustment, obviously, for him playing on that knee, trusting that knee? Of course, every guy who has that kind of injury goes through that mentally. But I think he's so driven to come back and have a great year and really prove that he's an elite quarterback that he's going to be ready to go by the Alabama game. I think the only way he isn't is if he injures himself again somehow while he's training and rehabbing.
We're going to follow up on that kind of question right there. You saw in the bowl game how good Lashley is at developing quarterbacks. Perry probably had his best performance of his career. He goes in the portal now. How much confidence does that give you that Lashley will be able to get something out of one of these other guys, Peyton Matoka, Tyler Van Dyke, or Jake Garcia, if they come in and have to play for some reason early in the season? How much confidence do you have in one of those guys being able to, do well in this offense?
Well, I think there's no doubt Rhett Lashley has done a phenomenal job, not only with De'Eric, but those other guys. You mentioned Nkosi, how much better he looked, compared to what we've seen from him in the past. I think the one benefit, obviously, was Nkosi was a redshirt, junior when he played in that bowl game, a guy who started, 12 to 15 games for Miami and, had the experience of being in the fire, beating Florida State. It's going to be different, certainly, with Tyler Van Dyke and Jake Garcia and Peyton Matoka. Those guys, have come in at the end of games, garbage time, a handful of snaps. So, Jake, of course, won a state championship in Georgia, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year coming out of high school. But it'll be interesting. I think, it's certainly a fair question to raise. I think anytime a guy gets in there for the first time, even Trevor Lawrence, right, the first game he played in, looked a little nervous. And so I think, you have to hope if you're Miami that, De'Aaron King can be 100% the whole season. Obviously, you'd like to be able to see some of his backups get in at the end of blowouts or games that are well in hand. So, but for now, I guess to answer your question, Charles, I'm a little bit more nervous about it than you are, because I feel like, having that experience of actually being in meaningful games, playing in meaningful games, none of those guys have that. And I think that weighs a lot more than just what Rhett Lashley can do as far as coaching them up.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick before we get on the next question. I think one of the things, though, that makes Lashley such a good coach, and some of these guys that are good coaches, whether it's a Jimbo Fisher or one of these other quarterback coaches of Riles, they're able to simplify that stuff for a young guy and make them understand what they're supposed to do. So that's why I have the confidence. Is, like I said, Perry did not look like, other than maybe a few times in his career, looked like a functional Division I player. He came into a very, very bad situation last year in the bowl game, and that Miami lost a very popular player. You saw it, how all the other players responded, and he stepped up. And I think a lot of that credit goes to Lashley. maybe they didn't get that before with some of their prior coaches at that position. So I do think I have a lot more confidence, probably just because of that. I think he can get something out of one of these younger guys.
And
Yeah,
I went and said, being at the game, you're looking at three drops that really, in essence, lost the game. I mean, if those three plays, there's a tunnel screen. I know that would have been a walk-in touchdown. There was a deep pass that would have been a big play. You're looking at a kid coming off the bench having almost a 400-yard passing game and winning a bowl. So, I mean, I was really impressed. I mean, I've watched a lot of Nkosi Perry, both in high school and in college, and I never thought he had that sort of game in him. So, to be very honest with you.
yeah, I think the simplification of the offense, for the quarterbacks has been big. I wish it was the case for the receivers. All these players keep declaring, that they're coming back in 2021. Let's run it back. I'm still waiting for Mark Pope and D Wiggins to announce when they're going to start catching the ball, because that was pretty embarrassing in the bowl game and certainly cost Miami.
Yeah, you know
Well, I'm
what?
moving on to the offensive line. It's been an issue at Miami for about a decade now. They get back some guys, Jared Williams, Navarro, Donaldson comes back. Obviously, you hope they're going to be better. Isaiah Walker is going to be coming in. Hopefully, he gets a chance. He's going to have an opportunity to play. Jalen Rivers is a kid they recruited that I was pretty high on. That you figure he's going to be in the mix. Does this look like a group that could maybe turn Miami's offensive line fortunes around?
Yeah, I agree with you, Corey. I do. I think you're starting to see some guys who legitimately look like offensive linemen, particularly at the tackle position. A guy like Zion Nelson, who was a project for them, and they were forced to basically make him the starting left tackle in his very first college game against Florida, playing against, fifth year seniors and getting embarrassed in that first start. He's a guy who's not only added, 50, 60 pounds to his body, but he's gotten better. He's really learned under Garen Just position, how to position his feet the right way. And I think, that's a guy in particular that can make a big jump that a lot of people didn't see, being this kind of player. And, that to me has been the most important thing. They've recruited well at the tackle position. A guy like Jalen Rivers, as you mentioned, to me, he's a guy who's probably ready to get a spot somewhere on that offensive line. Garen Justice has talked about how the moment they put Jalen in, they're not going to be able to take him out. That it's just one of those deals where once he's in there, he's so good and so talented. You just can't bring him off the field. And so it's going to raise a level of competition. I think when you look at how they performed this season, they had some older guys, Corey Gaynor, DJ Scaife. Both of those guys were juniors and they were kind of average. They weren't great. There were games that they struggled. And I think, bringing back Jared Williams now, you don't have to throw Jalen Rivers out there at right tackle. You could move him inside to one of those guard spots where you've got another guy, a young guy, Ja'Kai Clark, who's coming off a sophomore season where he wasn't that great. So to me, by recruiting the way that they have and getting guys like Isaiah Walker, getting guys like Jalen Rivers, keeping a Jared Williams around for a seventh year, I expect them to take a big step forward and to start looking a lot better. And they went pretty much from horrible, one of the worst offensive lines in the country in 2019 to average. Which is what you want. You kind of want to go from horrible to average to good, and I think they're in that process of going from average to good. And this year, it'll be as much experience and talent as they've had at that position.
Miami loses Roche. They lose Phillips. Rousseau before the year decided he was going to go to the NFL and didn't play last year. You take guys like Jafari Harvey. Who else do you expect other than him possibly to step up at that position?
Well, I mean, Jafari had I think a sack strip fumble in the bowl game, and he showed you that he's ready to be that lead role. I think in going forward for them at edge rusher. But you got a lot of other guys. Chance Williams, who was one of their top recruits in the last recruiting class. Cam Williams. They got a lot of Williams, by the way, on the team.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys, I think, are coming. And then, of course, you got the talent at defensive tackle. Nessa Silvera deciding he wanted to come back for his senior year, I think was important for them. I heard from some NFL scouts that he played well enough that if he wanted to make the jump, he probably could. And having him and Jared Harrison Hunt and even John Ford coming back for a 6th year, a guy who was a nice run stopper in the middle for them. That's going to help those edge rushers out, because defenses can't just say, oh, forget it. There's nothing in the middle of Miami's defense. So I expect Harvey, Cam Williams, Chance Williams. They've recruited in this class some other edge rushers as well. I think there's going to be enough for them, but Harvey's definitely the number one guy.
At the running back spot, Cam Harris is going to come back. I'm really high on Jalen Knighton in his second year. Obviously, Chaney is someone that's made some plays. They're bringing in Tad Franklin, who might not really have a situation where he can get the ball too much in 2021. This is a pretty deep group at running back. I mean, this kind of brings you back to the days of when they had, when they were able to run off a Clinton Portis, followed by, James Jackson, Willis McGahee, Frank Gore, where they just had a line of backs come through there.
Yeah, I agree, Corey. It's starting to get back to that level, because I think, between Cam, Chaney, and Knighton, you got 3 guys that could be legitimate number 1 type backs. And I think eventually Thad is going to get there as well. The way I sort of look at it, of the 3 of those guys that played for Miami last year, I honestly thought Chaney showed me the most. I mean, in terms of explosiveness, being a Willis McGahee type back, which is a guy that I know he was compared to by some coming out of high school. And, towards the end of the season, you really started to see him improve as far as blitz pickup and pass blocking and things that he needed to do back there to be on the field regularly and passing down situations. So, Knighton's coming off a shoulder injury. I don't know how severe it is. He was hurt in the Duke game at the end of the year, but hopefully he's able to get past that, and it's not something that sort of bothers him going into next year. But, you're right. The talent is there at that position. They didn't run the ball that great this year. I thought there were times, where Cam Harris hit the big play, but consistently running the ball well, that wasn't something that you saw enough of. I think that'll change now with Knighton and Chaney getting a little bit older, having some experience under their belt, having played in this offense. And I think, that's going to be the difference with this Miami team. You have Derek King back at quarterback. You have some, receivers in Mike Harley, and then, of course, Charleston Rambo, who transfers over. But I think the running game is the most important thing for them. That's really what this Rhett Lashley offense is all about, is getting some consistent performance out of the running game. And at times this year, they weren't around and they weren't consistent. So as long as one of those 3 guys emerges as sort of the lead dog, and you get consistent, excellent production from him, then I think Miami's offense can really take off.
And you talked about the grad transfer from Oklahoma, Rambo, and we've discussed Harley in the past. We've discussed Pope and Wiggins. Who are some of the young guys that they've recruited? Redding is one of them, but some of these young guys that maybe have a chance to break into that top group and make an impact next year at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think when you look at there's 12 scholarship guys now when you count Charleston Rambo in there, and I think particularly guys like Xavier Restrepo, guys like Keyshawn Smith. Keyshawn Smith to me was the most intriguing of all the receivers that they had this past year, because every time he got on the field, he ran a deep route, he got open. And I think he caught 1 pass, and it was just one of those things where it was like you could see the lack of spring football, the lack of consistent workouts because of what was going on with the pandemic. You could see that a guy like Keyshawn and De'Eric, once they get on the same page, that's going to be something that's really effective for Miami. And I thought that was the one element that was missing, was a consistent deep threat. As Corey pointed out, the drops in the bowl game were really, really the only reason why they lost to Oklahoma State, besides the 21-0 deficit that they started out with. So to me, those 2 guys, Keyshawn Smith, Xavier Restrepo, and then of course the guys in this recruiting class that I think eventually, once they get into spring and summer workouts, they can get on the field, start building that consistency with De'Eric. Romello Brinson, certainly Jacoby George. Your favorite kid out of Miami Palmetto High School. He's another one that I have big expectations for here in the years to come. So I think, all in all, I think they're going to be better at receiver, but I still want to see more consistency out of that position as well.
Well, I'm going to close this out, Manny, by saying Clemson, they made the title game, I think, for the 3rd or 4th year in a row. But they're losing some players. Obviously, North Carolina is in the mix. Within that, Miami's also, you have to feel like, in the mix in some way for the ACC. This will be the first time, I think, in a very long time where I think people really look at Miami as a potential ACC champion. How do you think they're going to deal with expectations? I mean, they haven't had to deal with being, in the spotlight in quite a while. And, they've had a couple of games in a game against Clemson this year. They open up with Alabama next year. They're trying to put themselves in positions to make some noise if they can come out of those games with positive outcomes. I mean, where do you think this Miami team is mentally in terms of being prepared for, the expectations that are going to be placed on them?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, Corey, because I saw two different teams in their last two games. I saw a team against North Carolina that got punched in the mouth and looked like the old Al Golden, uh, you know, Randy Shannon type teams that, yeah, they got a ton of talent, but then they come out and get punched in the mouth and they didn't know how to react. And then I saw a different team in the bowl game who fell behind 21-0 and was like, no, we're going to win this game. And they rallied behind, their backup quarterback and started to play really, really well those last three quarters. And so I don't know. I wish I had an answer for you. I think there's a lot more veteran leadership, as we've already talked about, than there has been at Miami in a long time. I think De'Eric makes a huge difference. Having him around, he's a guy who's not going to give up. He's gonna win at all costs. I think the NC State game really showed you, what De'Eric is made of. Winning a 44-41 shootout. But I think, to me, the biggest questions I have are on the defensive side of the ball. I think you got a guy like Bubba Bolden, who's going to be one of your leaders. He's a guy who's hungry, who wants to be in the NFL. But you need guys at linebacker. You need guys that in the middle of that defense that are going to emerge, that need to emerge and prove to you that they can sort of lead a defense. You kind of have to have three layers of leadership. I think Nessa Silvera is getting to that point in the defensive front where he'll be sort of the leader of the defensive line. But I think linebacker is a huge concern and getting consistent performance there, because the reality is Miami played a couple of really good teams in North Carolina and Clemson, and the rest of the schedule was pretty average. They played NC State with their backup quarterback. They played Pittsburgh with their backup quarterback. And while they finished 8-3, and you got to give Manny Diaz credit for the job that he did, I still got to see more from these guys to really believe that they're contenders. They the way that they kind of got rocked by Clemson and the way that they got rocked by North Carolina on the defensive side of the ball shows me that, there's still a ways to go before they're real contenders. But, as we talked about, they've got guys on offense. They've got Bubba Bolden in the secondary, Nesta Silvera, a few guys here and there. Can they get more of those type of players to raise their level of play when it matters in those big games? And I think if they can do that, then they can potentially have a real chance of winning the conference, because you're right. Clemson did lose some players. And I think, North Carolina losing those two backs, some of those receivers that they have that were real explosive. I got to see, what Mac Brown has as far as, coming back on that side of the football.
Well, well, Manny, I really appreciate you coming on today. I thought, it was a great show, and I agree with a lot of what you say. I do think when you talk about Miami, because of so many years of people having expectations and them not fulfilling those expectations, that there's always going to be that doubt. But I always look at things like this I feel like Miami's different now under Manny. He on last year when he had offensive problems, he made those changes. He saw some problems on the defensive side. He made those changes. The team did get better. Yes, they got blown out against North Carolina and Clemson, but I think he knows where the program is at, and those kids know where they're at, that they now know that, hey, listen, we're not that far from that. We just have to we have to work harder this offseason. We got to make less mistakes. A lot of the times you saw it even in the first couple games of the year, they make dumb mistakes where they get a 15-yard penalty. If they could eliminate a lot of those things, I think they close the gap in the ACC and they have a real legit shot. Last year, I remember, we had a discussion with you and your friend about Miami, and he thought they were going to go at 11-0, and I really didn't think they were there that they were there yet that last year. But they showed me a lot in their bowl game. They really did. They could have easily folded 10. that showed me a well-coached team. And that's the first time you can leave a loss going, hey, you know what? The chips were down and they performed above the level they were supposed to. So I have a lot of faith in what they're doing down there, and we know what they're bringing in talent-wise. And I think the one thing that's always made Miami special is when they've had talent and depth and that competition, guys are going to be afraid to not perform at a high level now because there's somebody better behind it. If Nesta doesn't play well or John Ford doesn't play well, we know Leonard Taylor is so darn good that he could take one of their jobs. And that's something Miami hasn't had in a very, very long time. It's probably been 15, 20 years since they've had that. And that's why I have a lot of faith in what they're going to do next year.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of depth in the recruiting classes. I think and what Manny's done as far as the transfer portal, filling a lot of needs. I think in the end, a lot of Miami coaches have gotten to this point. Randy got to this point. Al Golden got to this point. We're going into year 3. You feel really good about the talent and depth. They've got those 2 recruiting classes, right? And then you win 9, 10 games. It's always about what you do in year 4. And that's kind of where, Randy, Al Golden, and, Mark Richt was only 3 years. So it was year 3 for him where, you go from reaching that mountaintop to falling back. And I think as long as Manny Diaz continues to make the kind of changes and is amenable to, hey, we need to upgrade our defensive back coach, room. We need to upgrade. We need to bring in better recruiters, for the, this position or that position. As long as he continues to stay unsatisfied and makes the necessary changes, then I think Miami, you have to have hope if you're a Miami Hurricanes fan, because he is doing things the right way. He is improving the roster. It's a challenge to go from, 9, 10 wins to that next tier where you're competing for a college football playoff spot. And it takes a lot of depth, and he's getting there. It's just, we got to see now that they start winning some of those big games against North Carolina, start winning those games against Clemson every now and then. And then you get to that next level where all of a sudden, you really are a contender. And so that's the next step, man. And he's getting them there. I like Manny as far as being a person and a coach and somebody who wants to improve. Like, you see the hunger, it's all natural. It's all like he's not satisfied with losing. And I think that's what you need at that position, a guy who strives for more. And eventually they're going to get there. It's just, I look at this roster right now and I say there's still some holes on it that need upgrade. And we'll see if some of the guys that they've recruited can help fill those spots.
Well, once again, we appreciate you coming on.
Hey, let's stop. We got 25 years of relationship between the 3 of us. I'm not going to let Manny Navarro leave our chat without giving us at least one story at a time. The 3 of us were one story from your high school days where we all something that we can all remember and laugh about. Something that the people can learn about us. You got to have
one story. Wow. All these years of doing of covering the state championships. I mean, a lot of it was us just making fun of other people and laughing at things. So I don't know how much of it I can actually say.
So you're saying we're going to hell.
I'll tell you this, one of my all-time, I still laugh every time I think about this story. I still laugh. Charles, this was, I don't know, there must have been 25 of us sitting inside of a Fridays after a state championship game, and we're all sitting there cracking up, laughing, just talking crap. And Charles walks in there. He's looking for a table to sit at, and there's somebody sitting directly in front of me that Charles, I think, misunderstood. He thought this guy was somebody else.
Josh Newberg.
Right. So he walks in there and, he walks right behind this dude, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, what is Charles going to do to this dude? And, he sticks his finger in his mouth, and then he takes it out and he puts it in his ear and gives him this wet willy. And I'll never forget the look on the face of this dude who's like, who the hell is violating my eardrum right now? And when he turned around and Charles realized it wasn't
Josh.
Yeah, your face, it went from like laughing red to pale white, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did this to this dude. And it was so funny that literally all of us on the table just died. We're just like, I can't believe that was that was our element. We were having so much fun that, we laughed through it. Like as embarrassing as that moment was, we just all laughed through it.
that kid's still in therapy. All right,
He
he's
is.
still in therapy. But
He's still wondering who
I,
violated his
I
eardrum.
you guys should have known right there, then and there, man. I don't know if I could be friends with this guy. He's too much.
I think unfortunately, Charles, you weren't here for this one of my favorite ones. This was basketball in Lakeland,
Oh
which I know
gosh,
was
yes.
a pleasure doing with me. And we're at a little establishment in Lakeland, this little Irish bar, and we have been trying. We have Bill. You remember the Bill Daly story with JT? We're
Mhm.
trying to, with JT Wilcox. I think we were trying to leave and go get something to eat, and Bill had walked in, and Bill was ready to have a few drinks and party. And I forgot that we were trying to leave to go get something to eat. So
Yeah.
he like gave me like a little icky, like, "Hey Corey, are you ready? You finishing up?" Like, "No, man, I'm staying for a long time." And he sends me a text message that says, "You're supposed to be finishing up." And I had forgotten that we were supposed to go out and get something to eat. So really quickly, I just chugged my drink. Like, "All right, we're leaving, right?" "Yeah." Boom, like, come on. We left Bill Daly there all alone. Oh,
Man, I miss going to state football and being able to enjoy that those moments with you guys. It felt like, like not only would we get to watch great football, but just the laughing really with all you guys in between the press box and everything else. I miss those days. I wish I could go back more regularly. Once this stupid pandemic ends, I'll probably start heading back.
yeah,
Well,
one of those times we were all able to be together at the same place at the same time, which
Yeah,
that's what the great thing about it. It didn't happen too often.
yeah, yeah.
well, I enjoyed them, but Manny, we do this with all our guests. How can people follow Manny Navarro? And you do a great podcast yourself. Just list some of the things you guys do and how people can follow you guys, fans.
Yeah, so I have the Wide Right podcast, which is available on Apple, Spotify, all the regular podcast places. And I basically record that. My producer Mike Zinn is regularly with me, and then Kelvin Harris, who was a three-time national champion at Miami, starting center on the '91 team, and you know he's a regular guest, and we just we talk about Miami football once a week, and just kind of what we did now with you guys, just kind of covering all the storylines, whatever's kind of big deal. And so that's the podcast. And then social media, I'm mostly on Twitter. I use Instagram just so I can see what other players are posting on Instagram. I really don't. I share a few photos of my kids, but reality is I'm not on Instagram a ton. But Manny_Navarro on Twitter, I'm there a ton. And then of course I write for The Athletic. I was a part of Onside Radio, which was a new online radio station that Orlando Alzagari started here in South Florida, but I had to drop it because of my commitment to my job with The Athletic. It's just too much work hosting a 2-hour radio show and writing and everything else. So, but I'm available, mostly through Twitter. I check a ton of my ats whenever somebody ats me about something, and I respond. And so if you want to reach me and read my work, those are the places to find me.
Well, we appreciate having you on again. So
Always
Thank you,
appreciate.
Charles. It's always fun talking to you guys, and Corey. One of these days we got to go have some more midnight sandwiches, medianoches, as you like to refer to it.
Yeah,
Whenever you come
almost
down to
forgot
South Florida again.
noche sandwich. I call it media noche sandwich. And Manny and Andre Fernandez and Walter Villa will never let me live it down. All right. I actually had one here in Tampa at a place, actually St. Petersburg, a place called Bodega. And I don't know. I was expecting a little more. So I'm going to have to definitely have one down in Dade County to see how they compare.
Absolutely, man. La Carreta. You got to come down here.
yes,
You'll have a good
definitely. Definitely. We could talk politics and freaking have Cuban food, man. That's how it is on Southwest Asia. So, well, I'm out, man. But I'm glad to have you on, man. Look forward to having you back.
Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Take care.
Well, we did have a national title game last week. It was competitive for about, what would you say, about 18 minutes or 18, 20 minutes. Then Alabama got rolling, and it was, it was weird. I watched the first half. I was more into this game than I was in the last year's game, which I didn't watch very much of. This year, I got through a half. I went into my room to the where the ESPN online stuff is to watch the all 22 in the second half, and it was just, once Devonta Smith got hurt and he wasn't going to have like a 390-yard receiving game, Alabama they basically went into their 6-minute offense for the entire second half and still scored. I feel like Ohio State was the second best team in the nation. I really do, but man, there's just such a discrepancy between second and first. And yeah, Ohio State was hurt. They had some guys that were out, guys with COVID, guys that went down. Justin Fields won 100%. Trey Sermon breaks his collarbone on the first play. So everything they needed everything to go right, and it all seemed to go wrong. But still, I mean, Mac Jones is supposed to be a bridge quarterback, and they look like this.
Well, I mean, we've discussed it all year. There was a reason why they were number one in the country, and they stayed there pretty much wire to wire. This is a very good Alabama team. Now, I want to pump the brakes on saying it's the greatest football team of all time. I just
especially compared to last year. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's the thing now is when one team wins. And listen, we've talked about it. What Nick Saban's done at Alabama is truly remarkable. Fans of other teams shouldn't get upset because we're not going to see it again. Like 10 years from now, there's not going to be a team like Alabama pulling 6 titles in 10 years. It's not going to happen. When this reign of Alabama football ends, and it will end eventually, once Nick Saban decides he has way too many rings and trophies, and he's like, darn, man, I want to do something in my life other than just, I mean, he smiles now after he wins. So, like, it's becoming so easy that, he doesn't even he used to be like, what's this? You're handing me this championship trophy? What's this junk? And now he smiles. He lets the guys throw the wall. I mean, even Jimbo learned how to run away from those guys throwing the Gatorade back. But, Nick was like, he takes his time, lets them throw it on him. He's enjoying it a lot more now, winning, than I think he ever has, because I think he's starting to appreciate what he's done. Like, hey, you know what? This isn't going to be done again. Not too many coaches can pull this off. And it's just a testament to that entire program. And it's not just Nick Saban. Like, the coaches get in line, the players get in line. You never hear them bring up the words culture at Alabama. Like, it's already understood, like, hey, all that stuff's already in place. But I mean, Ohio State has nothing to be, as far as they shouldn't be upset. They probably shouldn't have been in the game in the first place because the Big Ten didn't even want to play football this year. But they got there, and and it shows you the difference between Ohio State and Alabama is that when one player goes down, the backup's not as good. Like Sermon's a pretty good running back. The next guy got in there, and there is a major drop off, and that's what separates Alabama and everybody else. Is their first 22, you could probably compete with most schools. It's when Alabama rolls in that second guy, that third guy. And you look, their wide receiver goes out. There's like 2 or 3 other receivers that step in. And yeah, they're not as explosive as Devontae, but their offense is still functional. Yeah. These other teams aren't functional anymore when their stars go out. So that's the biggest difference between Alabama. And we've talked about it. This is a team that had a lot of guys come back that usually don't come back. Alex Leatherwood came back. Najee Harris didn't have to come back. Devontae Smith didn't have to come back. And they've been fortunate that their top players stayed for another year in this day and age when guys all want to get paid.
Yeah, they didn't have any real opt-outs. They everything seemed to really work out well for them this year. I looked at it as, I think the only thing, I agree with you. I think, you can tell Saban's starting to really appreciate what he's done, the program that he's built, the machine that he's put together. I mean, there's never, I heard him talking about it, both Marcus Spears and Ryan Clark, who both played from at LSU, talk about really how nothing is ever more important than winning the game than Nick Saban. He never puts anything above winning. That's about players. He never puts anything within the program above winning. And another thing I heard this week, which was interesting, is that when he got into Alabama, the one thing that he did that I assume everybody else was afraid to do was that he cleaned the place out in terms of the hanger-ons, the boosters, and everybody who thought that they were power brokers in that program and had decision-making power. He basically told them all to get out of his face, and he'd call them when he needed them. And it didn't matter whether it was the multi-million-dollar guy or the former or whatever. He just basically said that I'm going to build this entire structure around everybody being focused on the same goal, and that's to win the football game and win championships. And I mean, that's something a lot of coaches can't do. It's something even though he had the credibility of winning the title at LSU, a lot of coaches, no matter they still don't want to step on everybody's toes. Whereas he came in, he basically threw a hand grenade on the place and said, we're going to blow it up. We're going to start from scratch. And I think that really shows the focus that he has and the mind that he has and the understanding that he has of what it takes to win and win consistently.
Well, it shows you the difference between Alabama and their little cousin Auburn. It just shows you right there. Auburn, a guy goes to interview. It's like, hey, you're keeping this guy. You're keeping that. No, I'm not. And that's it. And it's true. Like but I think Saban, him winning at LSU and Alabama being so desperate because they had run through so many coaches, they finally realized, listen, let's get out of the way and let this guy do it. And let's see if it works. It hasn't happened at Texas. We've talked about it. I wonder if Sarkisian's going to go in there and say, listen, this is how we do it, Alabama. You guys need to stay out of the way. Don't tell me who to take on the recruiting trail. We don't need the third or fourth nephew to the cousin of some Joe Blow in Austin that thinks he belongs on the football team at Texas. We got to recruit him because he's part of the Texas legacy. No, those kids do not belong there. And that's why Texas is underachieved for close to my whole lifetime. I mean, outside of one great year with the generational player in Vince Young, Texas has been the most underachieving program in the country. You hear how great it is, but no team has failed more than they have. And hopefully for their sake, someone like Sarkisian could go in there and say, listen, Saban did this, and you look at the success. I want to build the same foundation and program at Texas. And listen, we got more resources than Alabama. We got more money than them. We got a bigger pool of talent to pull from. We're a national brand. Let's start acting like a national brand. So you got to wonder if some of these guys that are part of the Saban tree are able to start to branch out. We just saw another coach, Coach Huff. He, got, congratulations to him. He's going to Marshall, and they're not going to have the same resources as Alabama and Texas, but that these schools start to let these guys do their thing instead of getting in the way. And that's the biggest issue you have is so many of these schools, the egos in the athletic departments, they just don't realize they're only hurting the program, not helping them at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I tell you the one thing, you mentioned Sarkisian at Texas, and I listened to his presser, and everything was going great. And I was like, this is good. He's saying it right. Up until the end, when they asked about that stupid song, which was a big thing with them and Tom Herman. And, right away, oh, we're all going to sing the song and be proud to sing the song and clap and dance. And I'm like, oh, God. So no, Texas still doesn't get it. Just so you know, Texas doesn't get it right now. Hopefully when Sarkisian walks in the door and starts the job, he'll be like, hey, all that stuff I said at the press conference, you realize was just BS, right?
What song do you want me to sing? Because I ain't singing it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like
all eyes are on me, not Texas, all right?
Yeah, they don't understand it. And I don't think they get it. That's just that more than anything, I think was really the highest respect I have for Saban is that he walked into a program where you probably had a lot of guys that had drank, that had spent nights drinking with Bear Bryant and hanging out and play. And he just told them all to get out.
Well, I remember one of the things I read once. I don't know if it was the coach that came from Washington State that lasted like a week before they found him with a hooker. Mike Price, like they found him. They found somebody to get rid of him in like a week. They're like, no, this guy, Hey, he didn't lie on his resume, but they found him with a dead hooker in the trunk. But Alabama used to tell these coaches, hey, listen, the boosters want you to sign so many footballs. Dude, Saban was like, dude, I ain't signing shit. Like that's not happening. And that's the problem is like these boosters come in and think they control everything. And it's like, that's why your program sucked for 40 years because you guys think you know what's right or wrong.
Yeah, and I think, Dennis Franchione had the same problem there. He goes in there 1 year. I mean, I think he goes 7-5, I think 10-3. He goes and he's just like, no, I can't, as well as he did, he won 10 games in his second year. It just wasn't what he just didn't want to deal with the BS. So for a coach to come in and say right away, the BS has to go. Either it's going to be me or the BS. And he say, y'all pick me. So all these guys, I just, and I hope that I feel like that's why I felt like Urban would have been good for Texas. I think Urban would have been that same way of like, hey, either you want to win or you want to go and do what you've been doing for the last 25 years and it's not been working. So
dude, Urban has way too many skeletons in the closet, and he never wanted that door open. Let's be real. Like he's like, I've already got lucky twice. Like I don't know if I can pull this off a third time. In Texas, they say everything in Texas is bigger. Well, don't mess with Texas. He's like, all right, I ain't messing with these guys. Like I can hide the skeletons and dead bodies in Columbus. Gainesville, I can hide the dead bodies. He's like, I don't know if I can hide it in Austin, Texas. They may find them dead bodies.
So he was smartly decided to go to the NFL where
he's like, I'll take my shot with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, there's grown men. They're responsible for their own actions at this point.
He's like, listen, man, Texas's problems ain't my problems. I'll just go right over to Jacksonville. I'm going to have the best quarterback in the last 30 years be my quarterback. If I make it to year 5 without having a heart attack or a fake heart attack, we're all good.
Everybody's good.
8-8 doesn't get you fired. 10-2 does in the SEC. He's like, man, Jesus Christ. I win 10 games at Texas. They're going to be wanting my head off because I didn't beat Oklahoma. But now he goes to Jacksonville and goes 6-10 next year. He's king. So,
but hats off to Alabama. I mean, there's nothing else you can say really. Another amazing season. That's 6 titles since I believe the 2009 season, if I'm not mistaken. 2009 season. So that's 12 seasons. That's 50%. They won 50% of the national title. So really hats off to them. And hats off to the teams that managed to win during the stretch. So that's Auburn, that's Florida State, that's Clemson, and that's Ohio State, and one more in there I'm not thinking about right now. And LSU. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, hats off to those teams for managing to win during this stretch because it's gonna. I think we might look back on those teams and say, you know what, they won during a time when teams just did not win titles other than Alabama.
Well, I think it upped the game of those teams. I mean, LSU realized, you know what, we can't just half-ass it and think we're gonna. I mean, like Orgeron went out and hired the best coordinators you could hire and great recruiters, and they put together. I mean, that team last year, I know everybody already forgot about it, but when you go back and look at how many NFL guys are going to be on that team and guys that are special in the NFL, you're talking guys that are possibly Hall of Famers. You have to go back to, the 2001 Miami team with Sean Taylor and Vince Wilfork and Willis McGahee, and even the Jameis team or the Nebraska. Listen, people forget, and you have a friend that played at Florida and went against Nebraska. That 95-96 Nebraska team, even though they were not a passing team, they were just as dominant running the football.
Yeah. Lack explosiveness.
They didn't lack. Listen, just because they ran, it wasn't 3 yards in a cloud of dust. It was 70 yards and we scored another touchdown. But people forget how great these teams were. And you've seen it over the last 30, 40 years. Listen, what they've done, like I said, you can't take away from what Alabama's done. It's truly remarkable. In our lifetime, we've only seen a few runs like this, whether it was what Bobby did at Florida State, or you saw the Miami. Remember if Howard Schnellenberger had stayed at Miami or Jimmy had stayed, you're probably looking at guys that would have won 3, 4, 5 titles themselves.
When you look at Miami, you look 86, they should have beat Penn State. There's no
Yep.
doubt about that. 88, their one horrible call against Notre Dame. That puts you at 5 national titles
Yeah.
in right there, if they do that alone. And Bobby, at FSU, you go from 87 to 2000, where they're winning 10 or more games each season. They played in, I think, 5 national title games, a few bounces, a Chris Winkie injury here, something there. They probably maybe win 4, and they probably would win 2 more during that stretch. But I guess it's just it's one thing that frustrated me were that was all this talk was this the best ever team, and I'm like LSU just played. I'm like I love Devonta Smith. I think he's great, but Jamar Chase was pretty damn good last year. He had 1,700 yards as a sophomore. Joe Burrow won a Heisman throwing. They're monsters all over the field.
Their quarterback, running back, and 2 receivers are going in the first round of the draft.
Yeah.
And they were just as explosive as Alabama was this year.
Yeah. They beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa, pretty much the same team that we saw this year, give or take a few players. They beat Texas on the road early in the year. They beat Florida, who I think was a better team last year than they were this year. They beat Georgia. They beat Auburn.
They didn't just beat teams though. They throttled them.
What they did to Oklahoma and Clemson in the playoffs. My God, what they did to Oklahoma in the playoffs was just borderline abuse.
Oklahoma decided to take a year off and not go to the playoff this year and play.
Oklahoma defense opted out of that game.
They were like, listen, let's just play Florida in a meaningless bowl game and look really good beating them when they don't care.
Exactly. So, there's a lot of, when you start putting them together, a lot of great teams. And, the teams that were not Alabama that won, they had great players in the quarterback position, Cam, Burrow, Jameis, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. Really the only team that you look was that Ohio State team that, even though Cardell was a second, third stringer, he still was a draft pick, and they had players at every other position. When I go back to the Ohio State team, they had Michael Thomas, who was a number 3 wide receiver. That's how loaded they were. And the best receiver in the NFL was only in on their 3 wide sets. So it's you have to have an amazing team to win a title in the Nick Saban era. That's the bottom line.
Oh, there's no question. But
you have to have a loaded team.
Hey, but you know what? Things all come to an end, and eventually it will. And we talked about it last week. I think next year's, not that Alabama won't be in the playoffs, they probably will, but I do think next year is one of the more open years, just because a lot of these teams are breaking in new quarterbacks, and that position's so important. And you never know what you're going to get at that position. Alabama's starting a true freshman that I don't think he's taken a snap in a regular season game, and if he has, it's very little. That means something, that there's going to be some time, adjustment time for that new quarterback. And I'm not saying he can't do it, but you got to look at the teams that have quarterbacks coming in next year. Justin Fields is leaving Ohio State. This kid's leaving Alabama. So Texas is losing their quarterback, but they have a young kid that's coming in. You want to know, really, there's not many teams that have guys coming back. Maybe Oklahoma, and I know you have your doubts about them in these bigger games, but there's not a lot of teams that have guys coming back. That's why Miami kind of can they sneak in there next year, with things, they're bringing back King if he could come back healthy. They've got a lot of parts, and we discussed it with Manny Navarro, but they got a lot of parts coming back next year. You got to figure they're the odds-on favorite to win the ACC. And if they come out of the ACC, they're in the playoffs, most likely. So
we just want to see guys. I want to see teams step up. I want to see somebody step up out on the West Coast, whether it's Oregon, whether it's USC, whether, maybe Washington. Somebody's got to establish themselves. I'd love to see a good Texas team. I don't know that we will, but I'd love to see it. I'd love to see North Carolina, Miami, teams that I think have a shot to make a difference next year step up. You want to see, I just want to see more teams in the mix And this will be the year. Clemson, I think, is going to be a little down. So maybe there's an opportunity. I think Georgia could jump back in there. You just want to see some more teams in the mix for as deep as, people want to claim, that college football is right now. It's still very thin at the top.
No, there's just at the end of the day, there's going to be 6 to 8 teams right now that start next year that have a legit shot.
Yeah.
And that's it. Maybe one team sneaks in there like LSU did 2 years ago. But even then, people knew how talented that team was. It's just it has become very little parity in the sport. And it's a sport that honestly needs it right now because people are going to get bored of watching the same team win every year, especially if you're not a Bama fan. I joked with you last week. I said, wouldn't it just be easier to all become Bama fans?
Oh.
I mean, you never argue with your friends. I wouldn't have to get mad at my wife after a game. There's so many things that would just be easier, just accepting it and going, you know what? I mean, listen, it's like living in LA, like I said, and being a Clipper fan. It's just easier being a Laker fan, It's just easier. They're both in the same city, but one just wins all the time, we may just have to become Bama fans,
We might just end up being Bama fans.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. I like their colors. I like the uniforms already. So I think that half the players are from Dade County, so you know them all. You've already got relationships with all of them going ahead. So it's okay. Now that they're pretty much recruiting Broward and Dade County regularly, it's a lot easier to root for them.
There's no doubt. Well, Corey, man, it was fun again. Hopefully we could get our partner in crime back next week. He's done getting over his pulled hamstring, but we'll discuss Florida State's off-season. There's I guess the transfer portal. We'll discuss with them, and Florida too. Florida dipped their foot into the transfer portal this week and pulled 2 kids in. I think that are going to help them a lot, and we'll go over that next week. But I look forward to talking to you again, and we'll roll out of this one. We're still intact. Nothing bad happened, and we're ready to go next week.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good, brother. Have a good one.
Same to you, man. Take it easy.